So we discussed that the single word summary for chapter 8 is insurance. Spiritual insurance. The title of chapter 8 was Akshara Brahma Yoga, which is essentially means knowledge of the absolute. So in chapter 7, Krishna has established that he has a form and that he's the supreme lord of everything. He's Adi Bhuta, he's Adi Daivik, and he's Adi Yajna. So that was in the last shloka in chapter 7. So based on that last shloka, chapter 8 begins with Arjuna asking 8 questions. So his 8 questions are as follows. For example, he asks, who is Brahman, or what is Brahman? What is Adhyatma? What is Karma? What is Adi Bhuta? What is Adi Deva? Who is Adi Yajna and where does he reside? And then he says, for a devotee, at the time of death, how do we remember you? So those are the 8 questions that Arjuna asks. In response to those questions, Krishna answers the 7 questions immediately. And for the 8th question, which is, how do we remember you at the time of death? Krishna takes the rest of the chapter to actually respond to that last question, which is essentially, if we are a devotee of Krishna, how do we face death? So I'm going to introduce a new term for you today. So in chapter 6, we talked about how Krishna introduces the concept of dhyana yoga, which is the 8-fold process of practicing Ashtanga yoga. In chapter 7, when Krishna talks about the dhyana yogi, he's not talking about the same dhyana yogi that he's talked about in chapter 6. So in chapter 7, when Krishna is talking about the dhyana yogi, what is the difference then? He talks about the same dhyana yogi doing the same thing, meditating, controlling the life airs and exiting at a certain point in time. And then he talks about his devotees in chapter 7 as well. And he does the same thing here in chapter 8. He comes back to what seems to be the dhyana yogi, and then he seems to talk about his bhakta. There is a slight difference. So I'm going to introduce a new term for you. So if you assume that the dhyana yogi is here and the bhakti yogi is here in the ladder, somewhere in between these two, maybe some of the personalities are closer to Ashtanga yoga and some of the personalities are closer to bhakti yoga. But between these two types of personalities, there is one more personality. It is not necessarily represented on the yoga ladder, but it is another type of transcendentalist that neither falls under dhyana yogi nor falls under complete bhakti yogi. They are hovering in between. So this kind of person that Krishna is talking about, when we read the shlokas in chapter 7, it appears that Krishna is talking about a dhyana yogi. But there's a slight difference. So this kind of yogi is called the Yoga Mishra Bhakti. This kind of yoga process is called Yoga Mishra Bhakta. This is from chapter 7, which means dhyana yoga that is mixed with bhakti is called Yoga Mishra Bhakti. So a dhyana yogi is not interested in sense gratification. That's why he goes away to the forest and then finds a holy place, a quiet place, a clean place, kusha grass, deer skin, cloth, all of that sits on it and then begins the meditation process. So it's clear that a dhyana yogi does not want sense gratification. But a regular dhyana yogi is really not interested in Krishna. But with this Yoga Mishra Bhakta, the slight difference is that their practicing of dhyana yoga is mixed with a little bit of bhakti for Krishna. So they don't want sense gratification. They have accepted Krishna, but they don't want to serve Krishna, but they want liberation. A dhyana yogi is clear. He is gunning for liberation. A bhakti yogi is clear. He is gunning to please Krishna. A yoga mishra bhakti or bhakta is somewhere in between the two. He is practicing dhyana yoga. He is thinking and accepted that Lord Krishna is there. But he also wants liberation. He is not interested in serving Krishna or pleasing Krishna. So a very, very, very subtle difference between the dhyana yogi and the bhakti yogi. So hence it's called yoga mishra. The word mishra means mixed. So dhyana yoga mixed with a little bit of bhakti is called yoga mishra bhakta, which is the kind of yogi that Krishna is actually talking about in chapter 7. He also talks about the same kind of person in chapter 8, which we discussed yesterday. So a bhakta worships Krishna to please him. A yoga mishra bhakta worships Krishna for liberation. That's the difference. A dhyana yogi is only focused on self-realization and super self-realization for the purposes of liberation. He's not necessarily a devotee of Krishna. A yoga mishra bhakta is worshipping Krishna for liberation by practicing dhyana yoga, not by practicing bhakti yoga. So because it's a mixture of dhyana yoga plus bhakti yoga, this is called yoga mishra bhakti. And it is this yoga mishra bhakti that Krishna is referencing in chapter 7, in chapter 8, and I believe today in chapter 9. So there are essentially 3 aspects that are drawn out in chapter 8. One is, what is the result of remembering Krishna versus anything else, versus remembering anything else? So what do you get by remembering Krishna? Doesn't matter when, during life or at the time of death. In its entirety, what's the result of remembering Krishna is addressed in chapter 8. That's the first one. The second comparison that is made is the process of remembering Krishna, the difference in the process between what the Yoga Mishra Bhakta does and what the Bhakta does. That's the second aspect. So first one is the result of remembering Krishna versus anything else. The second one is the process of practicing. So again, Krishna says you have to practice remembering me. Anusmara abhyasa. Anusmara means to remember. Abhyasa means practice. So Krishna is saying in chapter 8 how one can practice remembering him. And he compares the difference between how the Yoga Mishra Bhakta practices remembering him versus how the Bhakti Yogi practices remembering him. So that's the second point in this chapter. And then the third point that Lord Krishna talks about in chapter 8 is the actual execution of remembering Krishna at the time of death. And again, he compares what a Yoga Mishra Bhakta does versus what a Bhakti Yogi does. For the Yoga Mishra Bhakta, we talked about, right? He has to be careful whether it is Krishna Paksh or Shukla Paksh, whether it's Uttarayan or Dakshinayan, the time of the day, whether it is an auspicious time or not. So for a Yoga Mishra Bhakta who's worshipping Krishna to get liberation, at the time of death, he has to control for all these factors. If he doesn't control for these factors, Krishna says, where does he end up? Does anybody remember? This one shloka we read. If he exits properly, meeting all of the criteria, he gets liberation. If he doesn't time it properly, where does he go? Which planet? Does anybody remember?
Spiritual.
No.
Higher spiritual.
No. Krishna says they'll go to this planet, enjoy themselves, and come back down. Which planet is that? Huh?
Earth, Mataji.
No. They have practiced Yoga Mishra Bhakta. They've not been successful. They didn't time their death properly. So where will they go first? Krishna says, no, they will go to the moon planet, enjoy themselves in the moon planet, and then they have to come back down to earthly planets, what's called the Matyaloka. You remember now where he said, if you don't succeed, they will go to moon planet, right?
Yes, madam.
The yogi will go to moon planet, right? And then come back. So this is the Yoga Mishra Bhakta. So the three things that Krishna addresses in chapter 8 is, what is the result of remembering Krishna versus the result of remembering anything else? What is the actual practice of remembering Krishna and the difference between how a Yoga Mishra Bhakta practices and how a Bhakti Yoga practices it. And the final thing is the actual execution of remembering Krishna at the time of death. And the difference between a Bhakti Yogi, and Krishna says a Bhakti Yogi need not worry because he's always absorbed in. So for him, for a Bhakti Yogi, none of this criteria matters. Whether you die in January or whether you die in July, it doesn't matter. Whether it is Krishna Paksh or Shukla Paksh, which is waxing moon or waning moon, or rather I should say waning moon or waxing moon, does not matter. What time of day you die does not matter. Whether you choose an auspicious time or inauspicious time, it doesn't matter, because a devotee who's always thinking of Krishna is always an auspicious time. So these are the three comparisons that Krishna is making in chapter 8. Remembering Krishna versus anything else. The actual process being followed between these two kinds of transcendentalists. And the actual execution of this at the time of death. So this is like a high-level summary and little additional details of chapter 8. We also talked about that our entire life is in preparation for taking the final exam, which comes unannounced, unscheduled. Not all of us get notice of death. Which means, how will we pass this final exam unless we're always studying for it? And we discussed that only way we can pass this exam is if we are practicing right from a very young age. So Prahlad Maharaj in the Srimad Bhagavatam is telling his friends that this Krishna consciousness should be practiced from the age of 5. Then there is a potential for perfecting our life in one life and going back to Golok Vrindavan. Even the Srimad Bhagavatam has a phrase that says Ante Narayana Smriti, which means at the end of life, at the time that our life breath is leaving the body through one of the 9 gates, If we can remember Narayana, then our life is considered successful. Where everything that we've prepared for in the life, in that life, is successful because you've cleared the final exam. So life is a preparation for death, which is our final exam. And Krishna says we have to practice remembering him. Somebody asked me earlier, I don't know if it was Dr. Shika or Pratibha, where is this information about the Vaikuntha planets and Golok Vrindavan? I had mentioned Srimad Bhagavatam. Actually, the details are there in Brahmasamhita. Brahmasamhita was composed by our Lord Brahma of our universe. And the word Samhita means understanding. So Lord Brahma's understanding of Krishna's position and where he resides, how he looks, where Lord Narayana resides, what is the difference between Vaikuntha and Golok Vrindavan, is Lord Brahma's understanding of the spiritual world that was revealed to him. So the Brahma Samhita itself is a composition by Lord Brahma. It's an extensive composition, but once when Chaitanya Mahaprabhu is traveling in South India after he's taken sannyas, he finds this in a temple in, I'm trying to remember, is it Kanchipuram or Srirangam? He finds one section of the Brahma Samhita written, which I believe is chapter 5. So there are many chapters, but what is remaining that was actually written down was found in some temple somewhere locked up. And at that time, Chaitanya Mahaprabhu requested that the Brahma Samhita be copied so that he could take a copy. Because the Brahma Samhita talks in detail about Lord Krishna's position, Lord Shiva's position, Lord Brahma's position, the material cosmos, the spiritual cosmos, the difference between Lord Krishna and Lord Shiva, the difference between Vishnu and Lord Shiva. All of that is there in this 5th chapter. Normally, when we have festivals in ISKCON, when the Abhishek is going on, normally we recite the Brahma Samhita. I'm sure most of you have heard it in an ISKCON temple. Normally this happens, a portion of the shlokas are played during the Shringar darshan that happens in every temple at 7:30 in the morning, which was recorded by Srila Prabhupada's disciples. The last line of every verse of Brahma Samhita, Lord Brahma's composition that we sing, ends with Govindam Adi Purusham Tamaham Bhajami. Govindam Adi Purusham Tamaham Bhajami, saying that Govindam is the first Purusha. Tamaham Bhajami. So most of you would have heard it in an ISKCON temple. So the description of the spiritual world and the details of the spiritual world is mentioned in the Brahma Samhita. And we don't have the entire Brahma Samhita, we only have portions of it, which was discovered by Chaitanya Mahaprabhu in a temple. And I believe he had the verses copied and took that copy with him. So Samhita means understanding. So it's Lord Brahma's realizations of the position of Lord Krishna and the nature of Golok Vrindavan. And in this, Lord Brahma also describes Lord Krishna, that he has a peacock feather on his head, that he's always carrying a flute. He's always wearing a vastra that is golden in color. His complexion, the color of his eyes are always reddish. His eyes are always filled with mercy. His eyes are always restless because Lord Krishna is always trying to glance at his devotees. So Krishna is supposed to have very restless eyes. His eyeballs never stay still. He's always glancing here and there. His eyebrows also never stay still. So there is a very interesting, I don't know, I don't remember, where did I read this? I think I heard it in a lecture, that if you just offer obeisances to Lord Krishna, all of your miseries will be taken away. If you just concentrate on Lord Krishna's eyebrows, you will attain all knowledge. Or there's something like that. If you meditate on even one particular body part of Krishna, what is the benefit for you? There is some Shastra that I don't know where this is from. I need to figure this out. I do remember hearing this in one of the lectures, that if you focus on Lord Krishna's lips, what is the benefits? If you focus on his eyes versus his eyebrows, like that, there are very sweet explanations of what benefits one gets when is taking darshan of Lord Krishna's deity form in the temple. Does anybody know how one is supposed to take darshan? Where are you supposed to start? Does anybody know? A Shastra say
Legs.
From feet.
from
Legs.
the lotus feet, yes. So Srila Prabhupada says that when we take darshan, we should always start with the lotus feet of Lord Krishna and slowly move up, and the very last part that we're looking at is Lord Krishna's face and eyes. But we should begin with the lotus feet. That's the proper way to take darshan in a temple. Always begin with the lotus feet of Srimati Radharani or Lord Krishna or Lakshmi Narayana. So we have to spend more time on the lotus feet and gradually move upwards. That's the proper process of taking darshan. So these details are there in various shastras on what's the proper way in which we should take darshan. So simply by chanting, one can remember Krishna and can be immediately connected to the spiritual world, even though you may not be physically there in the spiritual world. So now I'm going to briefly talk about the trajectory so far from chapter 2 to chapter 8, in how Krishna has changed his messaging. So in chapter 2, Krishna tells Arjuna, all of us have to work. We don't have a choice. Even the lion that is the king of the jungle cannot say, I'm the king. He also has to work hard just to put food in his mouth. The lion cannot say, I'm a king, I'll open my mouth and in will walk a rabbit or whatever else. No matter how powerful you are, how intelligent you are, each Jivatma is forced to work for basic necessities. So in chapter 2, Krishna is telling Arjuna, after he complains and gives all the reasons why he should not fight, Krishna tells Arjuna, since all of us are compelled to work, you have to work for whatever outcome you want. If you want to eat, you have to work. If you want to enjoy a kingdom, you have to work. Whatever it is, you have to work. We don't have a choice. We cannot sit idly at home thinking somebody else is going to come and take care of us. So every Jivatma, including a human being, has to work to support himself, to keep this physical body. As long as the soul is occupying this body, one is forced to work. So Krishna says, do the work in chapter 2. Then later on, both in chapter 2 and chapter 3, Krishna says, do your work as a matter of duty. Because now when you talk about duty, you are including varnashram. If you're only talking about keeping this body alive, then you have to work to keep the body alive. Once you add varnashram into the picture, then you have to do your work as a duty. So Krishna talks about do your work as a duty, both in chapters 2 and chapter 3. In chapter 3, Krishna also says, do your duty and remember me. So you see the variation? First, do your work. If you want to stay alive, you have to do your work. Something. Then he says, do your work as a matter of duty. Then he says, do your duty and remember me. Then in chapter 8, he switches it. What is he telling Arjuna? Remember me first, then do your work. Then do your duties. So he's changing the priority. In chapter 3, he told Arjuna, do your duty and remember me. In chapter 8, Krishna's mood has changed. He says, no, remember me first, remember me always, and do your duty. So we talked about how you can always remember Krishna while you're doing your duty in the context of Janak Maharaj. So I'm going to talk about one more pastime. Although it doesn't involve Lord Krishna directly. So this story is from the Puranas. There is a sage named Pipalayana. This Pipalayana, he goes to visit Lord Indra in the heavenly planets along with Narada Muni. So they are traveling to Indraloka. And as they enter the heavenly planet, a dance performance is going on by the Gandharvas. The Gandharvas are the dancers. The Apsaras, I believe, are the musicians. So the Gandharvas are performing some musical performance. And sorry, the Gandharvas are the musicians, the Apsaras are the dancers, I believe. So the Gandharvas are playing some music and the dancers are dancing. And there are two dancers. Their names are Hu and Ha. Yeah, that is actually their name. Hu and Ha. I'm not making this up. So as Narada Muni and Pipalayana, the sage Pipalayana, enter the assembly, everybody immediately gets up to offer their respects. The dance is going on, the singers are continuing with their singing. But everybody else just gets up to offer a quick obeisances because two great personalities have entered the assembly. So when Pipalayana sees that Hu and Ha are continuing to dance, they didn't stop and offer their obeisances. He curses them. He curses Hu to become a crocodile and Ha to become a tiger. And eventually they do, because they are cursed, later on Krishna comes and releases them from the curse. One is the crocodile and the other one is the tiger. So the two, after the dance performance is over, the Hu and Ha come to sage Pipalayana, and with a great deal of humility and respect, they tell him, you are a great sage. Can you just rewind and see for yourself what we did? So Pipalayana, being a great sage, he sits down and closes his eyes and goes into meditation. And he rewinds what had actually happened. When he entered, what actually happened. So when he rewinds to see what has happened, in his mind's eye, as he's closing his eyes, he sees that although Ha and Hu were physically dancing, mentally they were prostrating both him and Narada Muni. So mentally they were offering obeisances. So technically speaking, they did not disrespect Narada Muni or Pipalayana because their duty was to please the demigods from an entertainment standpoint, while at the same time they recognized two great personalities, pure devotees had arrived, and simply mentally they offered their obeisances. So Pipalayana, realizing that he had made a mistake, he gets upset with himself. He curses himself And for some reason, he curses Mother Earth. And he tells Mother Earth, because of this mistake that I've made, you should open up and swallow me right away. And then he curses Narada Muni for being quiet while he was cursing the two personalities. So he curses himself, he curses Mother Earth, and he curses Narada Muni for not intervening while he was cursing her. So it is possible to mentally offer our respects and obeisances to Lord Krishna all the time while we're doing other activities. We can always try and keep chanting internally, like a tape recorder can go on internally in your mind while you're doing your work. So you can always think of how we can fulfill Krishna's instructions about practicing the remembrance of Krishna throughout the day. But one way of expressing our love for Krishna is service, which we talked about yesterday. Some of you who stayed back a little late, we looked at the various instructions in the Nectar of Devotion, that there are a total of 64 instructions for devotees. The first 10 are do's, the next 10 are don'ts, and the very first 4 have to do with the spiritual master, the importance of the spiritual master, accepting a spiritual master, serving him, listening to him, following his instructions. And then we looked at some of the various 44 items, how we should circumambulate the temple 3 times, how we should visit the Vishnu temple twice a day at least, how we should smell the tulsi leaves and the flower garlands that have been at the lotus feet of Lord Krishna, how if we ever receive a garland from the deity, we should immediately wear it, because wearing that garland, we receive the mercy of Krishna. How we should immediately, when we see the deities or our spiritual master, immediately we should drop down and pay our obeisances. So there are so many do's and don'ts, and Prabhupada said that it's not possible for us to remember all these do's and don'ts. Will invariably end up violating. So for example, we are not allowed to wear blue and red to the temple. How many of us pay attention to this? Even I don't pay attention to it. A lot of times I have worn red to the temple. I'm not sure why these 2 colors we are not allowed to wear to the temple, but there is in the Shastra, it is there that after taking an oil bath, or rather, what is that? After having oiled our body, we shouldn't step into the temple. We should take a bath. And some very basic things that we all know. If we visited a crematorium, we should not visit the temple. If there's been death in the family, then depending on which varna you're in, you are supposed to observe. For Brahmanas, I think it is 12 days or 13 days. For Kshatriyas, it's some 13 days. And for Vaishyas, it's 30 days or something like that, that you don't enter the temple. Like that, there are so many do's and don'ts about entering a temple, including a Vishnu temple, primarily a Vishnu temple. So, but Prabhupada has always told his Western disciples that if I tell you all these things that you cannot do, you will not even come and practice Krishna consciousness. You'll just give up saying, this is too much. So Prabhupada was very clear, let's not worry about adhering to all these do's and don'ts, because it may not be practical for us. And because our memory power is poor, we may inadvertently violate this, knowingly or unknowingly, doesn't matter. But there are certain minimum things that Prabhupada has established. If you come to the temple, you should have taken a bath. Prabhupada even allowed ladies to come to the temple when they are on their periods. The only thing is we're not allowed to touch the deity, we're not allowed to take the shatari. Obviously, we're not allowed to touch Tulsi or circumambulate her, and we're not allowed to take the Aarti plate. We're not supposed to go there. Now there was a big discussion within ISKCON, because obviously Prabhupada made this adjustment for Westerners. Did he really intend it for this to be followed even in India? Because traditionally in India, when a woman is on her menstrual cycle, she does not go to the temple. But in ISKCON, even today, we leave it up to you. You are allowed to come to the temple, but there are certain things you shouldn't do. Obviously, you shouldn't touch the pujari, and because if you touch him, then he doesn't know, and he will step into the altar, and he will be considered impure or unclean or whatever. So like that, there are so many. If you read the Nectar of Devotion, if you are on the altar, you're not supposed to sweat. The pujari has to take bath 3 times a day before going to the altar. There's so many restrictions in Shastra. So Prabhupada said, of course, for anybody who's doing deity worship, the standards are very, very strict. There's no compromise there. But if you're not doing deity worship, but you're just visiting the temple and you want to see the deities or attend classes or participate in the pujas and the festivals, then the restrictions are not that strict. I mean, although the Shastras are strict, but Prabhupada has created some exceptions. So an Acharya can create those exceptions. We cannot create those exceptions for ourselves. So we cannot create our own rules and regulations. When a pure devotee sets exceptions, then we are allowed to follow it. So for example, Prabhupada's spiritual master actually wanted everybody to chant 64 rounds of the Hare Krishna Maha Mantra every day. When Prabhupada went to the West, his Western disciples told him, Prabhupada, to chant 64 rounds a day will take you 6 hours. He says in the Western world, people are driving to work for 2 hours and driving back from work for another 2 hours. When will they find time to do 64 rounds? So Prabhupada said, okay, chalo. How about 32 rounds? Prabhupada asked. And his Western disciples said, Prabhupada, even 32 rounds we can't do, because our lifestyle is different. So Prabhupada said, okay, fine. I will not compromise, 16 rounds minimum. So Prabhupada changed the standard from what standard his own spiritual master and other spiritual masters had established. For how many rounds you're supposed to chant every day? 64 rounds means 16 times 4 is 64, right? So that's 8 hours. So it was all of the Western disciples told Prabhupada 64 rounds is not possible. Simply nobody will be able to do it. So Prabhupada said minimum 2 hours you need, 1.5 hours to 2 hours you need to set aside to chant the Hare Krishna Maha Mantra. So they accepted that. So that's why we're chanting 16 rounds. Otherwise, the other acharyas had established that you are supposed to chant 64 rounds a day. So like this, as per time, place, and circumstances, the acharyas may change the structure and the do's and don'ts. But we are not allowed to change it whenever we want. So that is something we have to be careful about. So if we do want any exception, then we need to talk to the guru, and the guru will make the final decision. So that's how it really operates. So coming back to chapter 8, to attain the Supreme Lord, Krishna also talks about the difference between the material world, that is temporary. It is created, maintained, and destroyed. And then the spiritual world, it's eternal. And the features of the spiritual world. And then Krishna talks about the actual process of remembering him, the difference between how a Yoga Mishra Bhakta remembers him and the Bhakta remembers him. And then finally, the difference between how a Yoga Mishra Bhakta actually leaves his body. He has to meet all of those criteria. And if he doesn't meet that criteria, then his destination will be the moon planet. And again, in chapter 8, Krishna talks about demigod worship again, and how it is really not necessary to engage in demigod worship. So this is the essence of chapter 8, how the yogis leave the body and how the devotees leave the body. and these restrictions do not apply to the devotees. So that being said, let's look at chapter 9 today. So chapter 9 is titled Raja Vidya Raja Guhya Yoga. Raja Vidya means the king of knowledge. Raja Guhya means it's this king of knowledge is secret. So Krishna is going to talk about the most confidential knowledge. So the single word summary for today's chapter is password. So if you want to enter the spiritual world, how do you enter the spiritual world? Because up until now, Krishna has said that for yogis, the destination is Brahma Jyoti. They are stopped right outside. They cannot enter the spiritual planets. Why? Because they are not interested in serving Krishna. They were more interested in becoming Krishna or being one with Krishna. Since they're not interested in service, they're not given entrance. It's as simple as that. Their desire was not to serve Krishna. Therefore, they are stopped outside of Vaikuntha itself, where the Brahma Jyoti actually exists. So what is the trick to enter the spiritual world? In today's chapter, Krishna will reveal this is the most confidential knowledge. It's only bhakti that allows you to enter the spiritual planets. Remember, Krishna has spoken about the material planets and the spiritual planets, and we discussed yesterday that the material creation is a quarter of all that actually exists, which means the spiritual world is 3/4 of what occupies space, which automatically means there are many, many jivatmas who are residing in the spiritual world. There is a small percentage that is residing in the material cosmos. So we need to figure out how to join our brothers and sisters in the spiritual world. We shouldn't think about how to make our life more comfortable here. We need to be clear that we want to get out of here. So this is chapter 9, the most confidential knowledge. Let's begin by offering our obeisances to His Divine Grace, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada. Srila Prabhupada ki jai. So Krishna will again begin with the importance of hearing. When procreation takes place, do you know which is the first sense that develops in the baby? Of the 5 senses.
Eyes, mother.
No.
Ears, hearing.
Ears. And do you know which is the sense that is still active at the time you're leaving your body?
Ears.
Ears. So the very first sense to develop in the womb is the ears, the ability to hear. Of course, the body parts are developing, but the sense that is active first is hearing. Similarly, at the time of death, even though you may be completely unconscious or you may be in coma, it doesn't matter. You can still hear. That is why in our culture, we are told and instructed that if a person is leaving their body, you should chant the names of Lord Hare. Why? Because if you chant the names of Lord Hare, whatever worries or tensions that they have, which we talked about, right? In yesterday's chapter, Krishna says, whatever you remember at the time of death, you will achieve that. You remember your children, you're going to come back again to have a relationship with your children. In your next life, you may not be their father, you may become their child and try to fulfill your obligations. Whatever karmic debts that you owe them, you'll come back to try and pay them. So at the time of death, if you know somebody is leaving the body, you're supposed to chant the Hare Krishna Maha mantra loudly. I know some people chant the Mrityunjaya mantra, but better to chant the names of Lord Ram and Lord Krishna. Why do you think that is? Why are we asked to do that? Why are we asked to do that? Because by hearing the names of the Lord, we're hoping and praying that their consciousness will shift to the Lord and not to whatever other things that they may be carrying. Our Shastra say that birth is a very painful process, both for the child as well as the mother. And death is like 2000 scorpions biting you. That's the amount of pain that the body undergoes at the time of death. So it's going to be very difficult to think about Krishna when you're undergoing so much pain. Both physically and then mentally, you're thinking about your family or whatever else responsibilities you have not fulfilled. It's going to be flashing in your mind's eye. So if there is ever an opportunity for us to be helpful to another human being at the time that we know that they're passing away, you should play the Hare Krishna Maha mantra very loudly, or you should recite it loudly, with the hopes that their consciousness will shift to the Lord and not to anything else. So we are giving them one more chance to remember Krishna at the time of death so that they can go back to Goloka. Why should they be born again? So that is the highest form of human welfare that we can think about. Right. So Krishna again begins by talking about, hear me carefully, use your ears. I'm going to reveal something very secretive. So that's how Krishna begins this chapter. The inconceivable relationship between Paramatma, Prakriti, and Jivatma. Again, Krishna will talk about it between 9.4 to 9.10. Krishna will talk about those who do not worship him, those who criticize him, again. And then he will talk about the glories of bhakti, again. So let's look at the slides quickly. So since this is Raja Vidya, the acronym for today is King, King of knowledge and the most secret of knowledge. So knowledge, the inconceivable relationship between Prakriti, Ishvara, and Jivatma. The problems of not worshipping Krishna are those who don't worship Krishna. And the glories of bhakti. So in this Bhagavad Gita, there is 3 types of knowledge that are confidential, which Krishna has spoken about. The fact that there is a difference between the body and soul is also considered confidential. Not everybody knows this. Maybe in Vedic culture, most people know this. Whether they believe in it or not is another thing. The very fact that there is a difference between the body and the soul is the first type of confidential knowledge that Krishna talks about in chapter 2. The next level of confidential knowledge that Krishna talks about throughout the Bhagavad Gita is that there is a relationship between the Bhakta and Krishna. This is called Sambandha. Eternally, there is a relationship. It's just some of us have forgotten. Some of us have revived that relationship by practicing chanting and doing all of the other things that we've been talking about. So Krishna says there is eternally a relationship between him and the Jivatma. This is called Sambandha. And the most confidential piece of information that is going to be revealed in chapter 9 is his pure devotees. So one is his devotees, and now it is his pure devotees, and how Krishna reciprocates with someone who engages in pure, unalloyed devotional service. So Krishna begins by saying to receive this knowledge. Earlier, remember, he said in chapter 4, because you're my friend, because you're my devotee, I'm going to talk about the same thing that I've already talked about to Vivashwan. Now he's adding additional criteria. Why is he adding additional criteria? Because this is the most confidential knowledge. It's secret, not everybody knows it. So here Krishna adds an additional criteria. For anybody who has to read and accept this chapter 9, Krishna is saying such a person should be non-envious. Somebody asked, can greed be used in the service of Krishna? And I said, yes, absolutely. There's one attribute that cannot be used in the service of Krishna, and that is envy. You cannot envy Krishna and hope to love Krishna. It's not possible. Kamsa envied Krishna. Therefore, there was no love in his heart for Krishna, even though he got liberated. Even through envy, he got liberated. But he was practicing Krishna consciousness unfavorably. Therefore, his destination was different. His result was different. So, anusuyava, non-enviousness. One cannot envy the Supreme Lord and then think they will understand what he's about to reveal now. Second, Krishna says, you must have a little faith to understand what I'm about to reveal to you. So what is the characteristics of this confidential knowledge? Raja Vidya, king of all knowledge. Raja Guhyam, most confidential, the secret of all secrets. Pavitram, purest knowledge. Uttamam, topmost, transcendental. Pratyaksha-vagamam, dharmyam, perfection of religion. Susukham, Krishna says whoever hears his knowledge will experience a great deal of joy. Avyayam, this knowledge that Krishna is about to reveal is everlasting. So we'll read the shlokas here shortly. So this is 9.10. Now let's go back. So let's read. The Supreme Personality of Godhead said, my dear Arjuna, because you are never envious of me, I shall impart to you this most confidential knowledge and realization, knowing which you shall be relieved of the miseries of material existence. So Krishna is saying simply by hearing this knowledge, provided you are non-envious and you have a little faith in me, you will be relieved of the miseries of material existence. This knowledge, Krishna is saying, is the king of education, the most secret of all secrets. It is the purest knowledge. And because it gives direct perception of the self by realization, it is the perfection of religion. It is everlasting and it is joyfully performed. What is joyfully performed? Bhakti. That's the password. The password to enter the spiritual planets is bhakti. Because practicing bhakti means being joyous. Those who are not faithful in this devotional service cannot attain me. Finished. Krishna is saying those who don't have faith cannot attain me. Therefore, they return to the path of birth and death in this material world. Krishna is already talking about what is the outcome for those who don't have faith in what he is about to say. By me in my unmanifested form, this entire universe is pervaded. All beings are in me, but I am not in them. And yet everything that is created does not rest in me. Behold my mystic opulence. although I am the maintainer of all living entities, and although I am everywhere, I am not a part of this cosmic manifestation, for myself is the very source of creation. So again, Krishna is repeating here that he is the source of everything that exists. Adi Bhuta. He is the owner, he is the controller. Understand that as the mighty wind blowing everywhere rests always in the sky, all created beings rest in me. O son of Kunti, at the end of the millennium, all material manifestations enter into my nature, and at the beginning of another millennium, by my potency, I create them again. So when Lord Krishna is talking about I here, he's referring to himself as Mahavishnu. So when Brahma also has to die at the age of 100 years old, then everything, all of the cosmos goes back into Mahavishnu's body. And when Mahavishnu is ready to create, then all the Jivatmas who still have karmic results, they will come back into being. So when Krishna says I here, he is referencing to himself as Mahavishnu, not as Lord Krishna. The whole cosmic order is under me. Under my will, it is automatically manifested again and again, and under my will, it is annihilated at the end. So Krishna is saying this is all happening as per my plan. This is my will. I decide when to create, I decide when to destroy. But remember, he's already said the spiritual world always exists. So it's this jail that he is constructing, and like we, break down old buildings and then put up a multi-story building on the plot. Looks like Mahavishnu is doing something similar. So he decides when to cut it down and when to create, when to cut it down and when to create. O Dhananjaya, all this work cannot bind me. I am ever detached from all these material activities, seated as though neutral. So Krishna is saying, although as Mahavishnu, I'm doing all of this, I'm detached from all of this. I am not, I am not crying, saying, oh, I have to build another jail. So many Jivatmas have to go and occupy that jail. Krishna is saying, I'm detached from all of this. I am neutral. This material nature, which is one of my energies, is working under my direction, O son of Kunti, producing all moving and non-moving beings. Under its rule, this manifestation is created and annihilated again and again. So let's come to the shloka. Please repeat after me. Maya Dyakshena Prakritihi
मायाध्यक्षेण प्रकृतिः
Stuyate Sacharacharam
सूयते
क्रियते
सचराचरम्
सचराचरम्
Hetuna Kaunteya
हेतुनानेन कौन्तेय
Jagat Viparivartate.
जगत्
जगद्विपरिवर्तते.
परिवर्तते।
We just read the translation of the shloka. So chara and achara, moving and non-moving. So Krishna is saying this Prakriti, this Maya Devi is working for me. She is my energy, which Krishna has referred to as inferior energy. Does not mean Maya Devi herself is inferior. It just means that the aspect of creation, the elements, the 5 elements, including the mind, intelligence, and false ego, they are considered inferior. O son of Kunti, producing all moving and non-moving beings, under its rule, this manifestation is created and annihilated again and again. So for the material cosmos, for our material cosmos, who is our father and mother? In this jail.
Parvati Parmesh.
Yes.
Shiva,
So Lord
yeah.
Shiva, along with his consort, are worshipped as our father and mother because we are residing in this jail. So they are like our, what can I call it? Foster parents who are responsible for us until we are ready to go back to our original father and our original mother, Radharani. So as long as we occupy this material cosmos, we worship Parvati and Shiva as if they were our foster parents. They are responsible for taking care of us. Hence, the worship of Lord Shiva and Parvati is very prevalent in our culture. So they are also called as mother, right? Mother and father. Non-worship. So now 11 to 25, let's look at it. So Krishna now talks about those who dismiss him as the Supreme Lord. Fools deride me when I descend in the human form. They do not know my transcendental nature as the Supreme Lord of all that be. Those who are thus bewildered are attracted by demonic and atheistic views. In that deluded condition, their hopes for liberation, their fruitive activities, and their culture of all knowledge are all defeated. Krishna says these people are hopeless. They are bewildered, they are confused, they are deluded, and whatever it is that they're chasing, everything will be defeated. Satyanash ho jayega. This is Krishna telling us this. O son of Pritha, those who are not deluded, the great souls, are under the protection of the divine nature. Who's the divine nature? Prakriti is Maya Devi. Who's divine nature here? For devotees are under the protection of whom?
Krishna.
No.
Lord.
Maya Devi.
No. Maya Devi is for material universe.
Yoga Maya.
Yoga Maya, yes. For those who are worshipping Lord Krishna, you immediately come under the protection of Yoga Maya. Hence, Krishna is saying you are under the protection of the divine nature. So there is Yoga Maya and there's Maha Maya. So if you turn your back to Lord Krishna, then you're under the control of Maha Maya. If you turn towards Krishna and worship him, then immediately you're under the control of Yoga Maya. They are fully engaged. So Krishna is talking about his devotees here. So the minute you become a devotee of Krishna, he says, you come under the control of my divine energy, represented by Yoga Maya, who is Subhadra Devi. They are fully engaged in devotional service because they know me as the Supreme Personality of Godhead, original and inexhaustible. Always chanting my glories, endeavoring with great determination, bowing down before me, these great souls perpetually worship me with devotion. So Krishna is talking about his devotees, pure devotees. What are they doing? He uses the word always. They are always chanting my glories, endeavoring with great determination, bowing down before me. These great souls perpetually, means continuously, worship me with devotion. Right? We discussed this. One of the definitions of devotional service was with no material desire, continuously worshipping Krishna in such a way that it pleases Krishna. It purchases Krishna. Only bhakti can purchase Krishna. Your jnana yoga and dhyana yoga cannot purchase Krishna. That's why he keeps you outside. Others who engage in sacrifice by the cultivation of knowledge worship the Supreme Lord as the one without a second, as diverse in many, and in the universal form. So this is called, there are different types of worship of Krishna. So this is called Ekatvena. And there is another term, Bahuda something. So we will discuss this tomorrow when I do a quick summary of Chapter 9. But it is I who am the ritual, I the sacrifice, the offering to the ancestors, the healing herbs, the transcendental chant. I am the butter and the fire and the offering. So again, Krishna is talking about himself here. I am the father of this universe, the mother, the support, and the grandsire. I am the object of knowledge. So Krishna is saying, if at all you want to study knowledge, then I should be that object of your study. I am the purifier and the syllable Om. I am also the Rig, the Sama, and the Yajur Vedas. I am the goal, the sustainer, the master, the witness, the abode, the refuge, and the most dear friend. Suhridam Sarva Bhutana. I am the creation and the annihilation, the basis of everything, the resting place and the eternal seed. O Arjuna, I give heat and I withhold and send forth the rain. I am immortality and I am also death personified. Both spirit and matter are in me. Those who study the Vedas and drink the Soma juice, seeking the heavenly planets, worship me indirectly. Purified of sinful reactions, they take birth on the pious heavenly planet of Indra, where they enjoy godly delights. When they have thus enjoyed vast heavenly sense pleasure, and the results of their pious activities are exhausted, they return to this mortal planet again. So Krishna has already mentioned this in a previous chapter, in chapter 8, that you'll go to the moon planet and come back. Here he's saying anybody who's practiced any austerities, any sacrifices, so much pious activities, if you accumulate, doesn't matter how much pious activities you accumulate, you cannot enter the spiritual world, because the password for the spiritual world is bhakti. It is service to Krishna with utter devotion and love. So here Krishna is talking about all the others. When they have thus enjoyed the vast heavenly sense pleasure and the results of their pious activities are exhausted, they return to this Mrityaloka. Thus, those who seek sense enjoyment by adhering to the principles of the three Vedas achieve only repeated birth and death. So Krishna is saying, those who are very obediently following the Vedas, obedience is very nice. Adhering to dharmic principles, very nice, but also very foolish, because if you're intelligent, you will worship me. But if you do all of this other janjat, then what is happening? You are just repeating that cycle of birth and death. But again, Krishna is going to compare. But those who always worship me with exclusive devotion, Krishna is saying, don't worship anybody else. For those who are worshipping only me and me alone, that is why in ISKCON you will see, generally we don't do demigod worship, because we simply are following Krishna's instructions in the Bhagavad Gita. Repeatedly Krishna is saying, if you've surrendered to me and you've taken shelter of me, there's no need to worship the demigods. And Krishna is demanding exclusivity here. He's saying, you don't worship anybody else, worship only me. But those who always worship me with exclusive devotion, meditating on my transcendental form, it's a very important shloka. To them I carry what they lack and I preserve what they have. This is how you know that Krishna can change your destiny. He can modify your prarabdha karma. When you took birth, you came with a certain amount of prarabdha karma that you're supposed to experience in this life. But the minute you become a devotee of Krishna, because you come under the control of Yoga Maya, Krishna can change your destiny. That's why he's saying, to them, I carry what they lack. Whatever you don't have, Krishna will give it to you. I preserve what they have. Whatever you already have, that is good for you to perform devotional service, Krishna says, I will make sure you retain it. Whatever you don't have to become a pure devotee of mine, I will give it to you. Whatever you've already attained till now, I will make sure you keep it. But his demand is exclusivity. An exclusive clause you have to agree to with Krishna. So he's demanding here. Those who are devotees of other gods and who worship them with faith actually worship only me, O son of Kunti, but they're doing it in a wrong way. Krishna is saying, ultimately, if you are worshiping the demigods or whatever, Because I'm the one sanctioning everything. No, behind the scenes, you don't know who is actually sanctioning. If you knew that I was sanctioning, you would realize you're worshipping me in the wrong way. So Krishna is saying, you don't realize it. You're actually worshipping me because I am the one. Bhoktaram yagyatapasam. I'm the one accepting your sacrifices. I'm the one enjoying your austerities. It's not the demigods who are enjoying it. And then Krishna says, but you're worshipping me the wrong way. What's the right way to worship Krishna? Give up the worship of demigods. I am the only enjoyer and master of all sacrifices. Therefore, those who do not recognize my true transcendental nature fall down. So he is saying, because you're worshipping me in the wrong way, you're going to come back and take birth again. Those who worship the demigods will take birth among the demigods. Those who worship the ancestors go to the ancestors. Those who worship ghosts and spirits will take birth among such beings. And those who worship me will live with me. Is it clear what Krishna is saying? He's saying if you worship the demigods, you are going to go there. You worship your ancestors, you're going to go south. Pitraloka. You know where Pitraloka is? Pitraloka is where Yama Maharaj lives. Those who worship ghosts and spirits will take birth among such beings, and those who worship me will live with me. Again, he's giving you guarantee. If one offers, this is a very famous shloka, if one offers me with love and devotion, a leaf, a flower, a fruit, or water, I will accept it. So Krishna is saying, if there is love and there is devotion for me, whatever you offer me, I will accept it. And then in the next shloka, whatever you do, whatever you eat, whatever you offer or give away, and whatever austerities you perform, do that, O son of Kunti, as an offering to me. So in this shloka, Krishna is not talking about love or devotion. He's simply saying, okay, never mind, whatever it is you do in your life, you do, Baba. But at least offer it to me before you do anything else. In this way, you will be freed from bondage to work and its auspicious and inauspicious results. With your mind fixed on me in this principle of renunciation, you will be liberated and come to me. And then Krishna says, I envy no one, nor I am partial to anyone. I am equal to all. After saying all this, that shloka ends with but. Krishna says, but whoever renders service unto me in devotion is a friend, is in me, and I am also a friend to him. So Krishna is saying, I am impartially partial. What does that mean? He's impartially partial. What does that mean? How can you be impartially partial? Krishna is saying, whatever you want from me, I'll give you. If you want me itself, then I have to be a little partial to you, right? Because you want me itself. You are not asking for wealth. You are not asking for anything else. You are asking for me. How can I not be partial to you? So Krishna says those who actually want him itself and want an opportunity to always be performing service and to always please him, Krishna says, I become your friend. Just like you want me as your friend, I also accept you as my friend. Even if and these are important shlokas, we'll come to the slides in a minute. I do have to stop the class exactly at 10:30 because I have an office meeting. Even if one commits the most abominable action, if he's engaged in devotional service, he's to be considered saintly because he's properly situated in his determination. Yesterday, we were talking about how careful we have to be as devotees not to find faults with other devotees. This is what Krishna's instruction is. Outwardly, that other person may not be perfect in the way they are performing their seva. Sometimes they may even commit some egregious fault. But Krishna says, in my eyes, If they are my devotee, I expect you to consider them a saint because I have accepted them to be saintly because their determination is to be my devotee. So Krishna is telling us, when you become my devotee and you observe others being my devotee, your tendency is going to be to find fault. Somebody is not doing right, you will find criticism. You will say, "Chi, look at that person. They call themselves devotee. They don't have a right to call themselves a devotee." And mentally, even if you don't express it to that person or you don't share this, just the thought process alone will destroy your own bhakti. Because why? Krishna is saying, in my mind, they are a saint. Why you are it? How do you know how much love they have for me? How do you know how determined they are to serve me? Because that is my calculation. In your eyes, they may be committing all kinds of ghastly mistakes. But Krishna says you need to overlook that. Why? In the next shloka, Krishna is explaining. He quickly becomes righteous and attains lasting peace, which means, as we've discussed again and again, this is a process. It's not today you chant Hare Krishna, tomorrow you become perfect. We are in the hospital trying to treat ourselves. Some of us have level 4 cancer and some of us have level 1 cancer. What can we do? We can only follow the instructions of the spiritual master and try to cure ourselves. Some of us are very contaminated and some of us are less contaminated. So these differences you will see even in devotees. Some devotees in your eyes may be better than other devotees. But Krishna is saying, don't look at these external differences. And then, as if to emphasize it further, Krishna says, O son of Kunti, declare it boldly that my devotee never perishes. So slowly we are purifying ourselves. So as long as we are carrying anarthas within us, our imperfectness will become visible to others. So we shouldn't go out of our way to find imperfectness in others. And similarly, they shouldn't be going out of their way to find imperfectness in other devotees, with one exception, or maybe two exceptions. Guru has the right to chastise you and correct you. And senior devotees have the right to chastise you and correct you if you're doing something wrong. You can't tell a senior devotee if they're correcting you, no, Krishna said this in chapter 9, Shloka 30 and 31, you're violating his instructions. You shouldn't do that. Because a devotee's mood is always, I am ready to be corrected. I'm ready to be chastised. So there are exceptions. One is Guru can correct you, and any senior devotee can correct you. If you have stepped out of line or you're doing something that is inappropriate, they are in the proper position to correct you. Okay? These statements of Krishna doesn't mean nobody should criticize you ever. Nobody should correct you ever. No, there are exceptions. O son of Pritha, those who take shelter in me, although they be of lower birth, women, Vaishyas and Shudras can attain the supreme destination. I will explain this shloka because it's a little bit of a controversial shloka and people misread this. It's like as if Krishna is giving you there's an exception to the rule. Oh, Krishna is also going to take women into the spiritual world. Also, Vaishyas are allowed, Shudras are allowed. No, that's not what this means. What this means is that as per our Varnashrama system, in a Gurukul, only Brahmanas and Kshatriyas are allowed to study the Shastras. Women are not allowed in the Gurukul to study the Shastras. Vaishyas are not allowed to study the Shastras, and neither are the Shudras allowed to study the Shastras, because to study the Shastras, you have to be in the sattvagun state. You should exhibit sattvagun characteristics. Because these sections of society were not allowed to study the Shastras as a means to achieve self-liberation, Krishna is saying here, for these kind of people, all they have to do is take shelter of me, practice bhakti, and they can also come back to the supreme destination. So they need not think, oh, I cannot practice dhyana yoga because I'm a woman. I cannot practice jnana yoga because I'm a woman. I'm not allowed to. Krishna says all of them, anybody can practice bhakti yoga and come back to me. I do not discriminate. But for other paths, there are criteria established as to who can and cannot follow. But with bhakti yoga, you don't need any qualification except when you come in contact with a spiritual master or a guru, they invoke a desire in you to be attracted to Krishna. So the only qualification that is needed to practice bhakti is a little bit of faith, a little bit of affection for Krishna. No other qualification is necessary. How? So Krishna is saying, if women, Vaishyas and Shudras are not allowed to follow the other paths, because that's how the scriptures are set up. But look at what he's saying. If even these people can come back to me just by practicing bhakti yoga, how much more this is so of the righteous brahmanas, the devotees and the saintly kings. So he's saying the brahmanas, the devotees and the Raja Rishis, because they are always preoccupied thinking about him, definitely they will attain the supreme destination. Therefore, having come to this temporary miserable world, engage in loving service unto me. So Krishna is saying, I know this world is a painful place. I know it's a terrible place. It's a place where you're going to experience misery. And then he's telling us, why don't you just learn to love me and offer your service to me? Because then you will achieve the destination. Very famous Shloka, 9.34. These are the 4 instructions Krishna is giving us. Engage your mind always in thinking of me, become my devotee, offer obeisances to me, and worship me. Being completely absorbed in me, surely you will come to me. So this, we've read through the shloka, so we'll just quickly go through the slides. So here, avajananti mamudha manusham tanumashritam param bhavam ajananto mama bhuta maheshwaram. So Krishna is saying there is a certain category of people who reject me, who reject my transcendental nature. And Krishna is calling them fools, mudha. Rejecting Krishna. Moghasha mogha karmano mogha jnana vichetasaha rakshashima shurim chaiva prakritim mohinim shritaha. Then he talks about the demons and those who don't believe in God. They may be chasing all kinds of things, knowledge, liberation, fruitive activities. Krishna says they'll be defeated in the end. Who's a Mahatma? Mahatmanastu mam partha daivim prakritamashritah bhajantananya manaso gyatva bhutadam avyayam. Then he's talking about those who are not deluded, the great souls, under the protection of divine nature, Yogamaya. They are fully engaged in devotional service because they know me as the Supreme Personality of Godhead, original and inexhaustible, avyayam. How do you recognize Mahatma? So Krishna is saying there is characteristics of the Mahatma. Satatam kirtayanto mam, which means they are always chanting. They are using their lips to chant my glories. They are using their lips to chant my holy names. Satatam means always. Satatam kirtayanto mam yatantascha dridavritah namasyantascha mam bhaktya nityayukta upashate. Namasyantas, they are always bowing down to me. Yatantascha dhridavrata. Dhridavrata means they are determined. They don't give up practicing their devotional service to me. Nityayukta, perpetually they are worshipping me with devotion. So Krishna is saying, these are my pure devotees. This is what they're always doing. They're always thinking of me. So activities, kirtayanta, always chanting. Dridavrata, with a fixed vow, determined. Namasyanta, offering obeisances. Nityayukta, always engaged in my service. Then the other types of worshippers, the indirect worshippers Krishna talks about. They are worshipping me, but they are worshipping me wrongly, he says. Ekatvena, in oneness. So these are the people who worship the Brahman aspect of the Lord. Pritakvena, they worship many demigods, diverse as many. Bahuda Vishvato Mukha, they worship the universal form of the Lord, the Virat Rupa form of the Lord. The result for those who accept or reject Krishna. So this is, if you worship the demigods, you go to the demigods. If you worship the ancestors, you go to the ancestors, so on and so forth. Yanti deva vrita devan pitran yanti pitravrataha bhutani yanti bhutejya yanti madhyajino pimam. So this is the various destinations depending on who you are worshipping. So love and service attitude is the most important thing for a devotee. That's their motive. Their motive is to love Krishna and to serve him. Love means service. You cannot love someone and not express it. So the expression of love comes through service. If you have material desires, you worship the demigods. The difference we talked yesterday, Krishna is like a parent. He will always do what is good for you. Demigod is like a shopkeeper. They will give you whatever you want as long as you pay the price. So whatever you get from the demigod is temporary. There is no after sales service. So whatever you get from the demigod, there is no warranty and guarantee. Huh? Whatever product or service you're buying from the demigod doesn't come with a warranty or a guarantee. You can't go back to them and complain, hey, you sold me this. What, it didn't work. So there is no after sales service with the demigods. You should remember that. No guarantee, no warranty with what you're trying to purchase from the demigods, because whatever they give is going to be temporary. It's going to break down. But Krishna, obviously, the blessings that you get from Krishna is eternal. So we discuss this many different ways. Krishna has 33 crore demigods doing his work for him. They all manage so many different departments: electricity, Surya; construction, Lord Brahma; power is Agni; water is Varuna; mental health. They say the moon influences how you feel about yourself. Ganesha, if you have any grievances and any obstacles towards you achieving material things, one worships Ganesha to remove those obstacles. So like this, Krishna says he's the Adi Deva. He's the God for the demigods. How Krishna reciprocates? Ananyas chintayanto mam ye jana paryupashate tesham nityabhiyuktanam yogakshemam vahamyaham. But those who always worship me with exclusive devotion, meditating on my transcendental form, to them I carry what they lack, and I preserve what they have. And then bhakti is actually very simple. Krishna says, just offer me a leaf, a flower, a fruit, a little bit of water, but do it with love and affection. It comes back to Nishkama Karma Yoga. In essence, work is needed even for bodily maintenance. So do your duty, have only prasadam, whatever charity you do it for furthering Krishna's desires. Practice some austerity by meditating on Krishna, by chanting on the beads. The result is freedom that comes by connecting our activities with the Lord, by following the regulative principles. In this way, you'll be freed from bondage to work and its auspicious and inauspicious results. So with your mind fixed on me in this principle of renunciation, you'll be liberated and come to me. The Lord is not partial. We read the shloka. He's impartially partial. So if you befriend him, he's forced to become your friends. So we need to ignore the external frailties and faults being exhibited by devotees, including pure devotees. The very last shloka, Manmana Madbhatto Madhyaji Mam Namaskuru. So Krishna is saying, always think of me, become my devotee, offer your obeisances to me, worship me. These 4 instructions we should all remember. Manmana, always think of me. Madbhakto, become my devotee. Madhyaji, worship me. Mam Namaskuru, offer your dandavats pranams to me every day. So essentially Krishna is saying, do these 4 things. By doing these 4 things, you can always remember. So we'll stop here for the day. And if you have any questions,